And we're live.
Everybody, welcome. Today is the 28th day of February. This is our full council meeting here in the Village of Gulf. Manor. If you would stand as you're able and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Lancer, will you do a roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Betcher? Here. Ms. Cheney?
Here.
Mr. Fisher? Mr. Kmet?
Here.
Ms. Snyder?
Here.
Mr. Van Horn? Here. All members are present except for Mr. Fisher.
Thank you. Do we have a motion?
Motion to excuse Mr. Fisher.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Without objection, I'll take that as unanimous. Thank you. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the agenda? Do we have any amendments to the agenda? No amendments, then do we have a motion to accept the agenda?
Motion to accept the agenda.
There's a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Very good, thank you. I see that we don't have any persons registered to address the council. Is that true to everyone's knowledge? Right. Looking at 3 sets of minutes that we need to approve. The
Actually,
first,
Mr. Mayor, there's only one. I did
Okay.
not get to the other two today. It's for the last meeting, Monday, February 14th, 2022.
is the one that we're not doing, I'm sorry.
We're not doing January 31st.
We're doing,
or,
we're just doing one.
February 22nd.
Okay,
Correct.
so minutes for the previous meeting from the 14th of February.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And this evening, I got a couple items, the mayor's report. First off, I know there's a lot of fear and the complicated emotions that often accompany that, not just locally, but around the world, with the lead up to the eventual military invasion of the Ukraine, as is the case when fear is accompanied by a reality of powerlessness over the situation causing the fear. Mental health is often very much challenged, even among folks who think of themselves as rarely being affected by such things. I encourage people to actively talk about their fears with trusted friends and families, and if that kind of support isn't available, to recognize you are at a greater risk, health risk, and take appropriate measures to address that. For those of us that do have healthy support systems, I ask that you be mindful that there are many who don't, and remind you that your asset of having a greater capacity of concern, patience, and compassion may be called upon more than usual. Thank you for keeping that in mind and practicing it to better take care of one another. Do more frequent wellness checks and let people just talk if that's what they need to do, for what that's worth. I'm uncertain how widespread this was, but I know there were several emails last week that weren't from who they said they were from and were therefore a cause of alarm to some folks. Saw 2 of these last week that seemed to me to be more sophisticated than usual. Seems like the frequency and skill of these is increasing. That being the case, I want to remind everyone, if you get an email that looks suspicious, always check the email address it came from before responding or opening any attachments. Opening the attachments can be a real serious issue. Also, many email apps today do not display the sender's email, just the name, which makes this kind of attack harder to notice because it looks like it's coming from someone you know. It takes an extra step of clicking on that name to see the actual email address associated to reveal that it's fake. Wanted to bring up that decisions about whether or not to broadcast council meetings, including committee meetings, are properly a concern of the full council. I'm concerned that it can potentially come across as an effort to not include as many details in the official record of a meeting, or in some way hiding the business of council when we say some open meetings will be broadcast and some will not. My opinion is that it serves the principles of transparency in government if our open meetings are always broadcast and recorded, including our working meetings. You may disagree with me and feel that it's politically smarter sometimes to not broadcast our meetings. Though I disagree with you, I'm happy to talk about it. So if this is something you feel strongly about, certainly call me and we can discuss it. My understanding from legal counsel is that we're not required to broadcast or record our meetings. This is just my statement of what I think is the appropriate thing to do when it's an open meeting. Community engagement. Tonight, I'm announcing the members I've selected for a relatively new committee called the Community Engagement Committee. I created a version of this committee just before COVID that did fare very well. I'm hoping we're on the other side of that now. The purpose of this committee is to both engage the broadest spectrum of our community for input, and also to ensure better communication to a broader spectrum of our community. I have named Sharon Cheney as chair of the committee, Ashley Snyder as vice chair and communications chief, David Fisher and Rob Wilkinson as community liaisons. There are a number of seats on that committee that I would like to see further filled, and we'll keep everyone updated on my progress with that. My understanding is that Chairwoman Cheney has indicated the best meeting schedule for the group will be on the Tuesdays before the second council meeting each month at 9:30 a.m. So that first meeting would be March 22nd, 9:30 a.m.
That's
I believe. Finance Committee, also want to announce that former Councilman Aryeh Kreidenoff has accepted my request to serve as a member of our Finance Committee. He conveyed his official acceptance last week and attended this evening's Finance Committee meeting. And I thank him for his willingness for service, and would ask everyone else, welcome. Yes. Attended the funeral of former clerk treasurer Greg Doring. We had 2 former mayors in attendance as well, Donna Falk and Alan Zafiro, and 3, if you count the reception in which Ron Hurth and Ms. Cheney attended as well. So it was a good showing. The church was packed and the municipal hall was packed. The last day of service of Station 47 is today through 6 a.m. early morning tomorrow. So if you care to join me tomorrow morning, whatever it is that you're doing at 6 a.m., to take a moment to pause and consider the history of camaraderie and solidarity that while many of us who were never firefighters can possibly understand, what we can do is our best to honor those leaving the station and those who came before. Celebration honoring the decades of service of our firehouse and the service of all the employees and volunteers that made it such a cherished asset in our community, scheduled for Saturday, April 2nd at 7 p.m. And finally, part of the opioid settlement we agreed to with the state involves the formation of a regional foundation that decides how the money gets sent, that's dispersed. Our region is Hamilton County, and in our elected officials meeting with the commissioners last week, a proposal for structuring that foundation was discussed in terms of who would sit on that board. And basically, I'm going to read what who they're suggesting. So they're suggesting that, so these would be the folks that determine how the money is spent in the county. All right, so there's different local governments. And basically the understanding is that if your local government is getting less than 500, is that a year or 500? I'll get you details on that. There's a certain level, like if your community is getting less than this amount of money, it's just going to go to the county. All right. And the decision about how the money, how it gets distributed and everything, they have a proposal of who the elected officials are that would be making that decision. They're proposing that it be the Hamilton County Commissioners, 2 members from the city of Cincinnati, the Hamilton County Coroner, Hamilton County Health Commissioner, the City of Cincinnati Health Commissioner, Hamilton County Mental Health and Regional Services Board President, the Hamilton County Drug Court, a Hamilton County Drug Court Judge, a Hamilton County Sheriff, Emergency Management Agency, someone from that's a township trustee, someone that's a village mayor, someone that has lived experience, someone that's an educator, someone that's a mental health professional, someone that's a business leader, someone that's a faith leader, and someone that's a hospital representative. They said that they'll be working on some specific legislation that we can, show to our solicitor and, present it to council to see if we agree with it. And, that we'll be able to give them feedback about if it should be tweaked or not, right? And that's all I have in a report, unless there's any questions. Mr. Hurth.
Thank you. So I'll have an abbreviated report this evening. COVID protocols, we continue. Infections are declining dramatically in Hamilton County, so you've noticed that we are not as diligent as we have been about wearing masks and so forth, but we would ask everyone to exercise caution and then good judgment in terms of protecting yourselves. We did have a large group gathering here in the building over the weekend. Seemed like that went well, and we're glad to see people back in the building. There are no new updates on projects that I reported at the last council meeting, so I would ask you to refer to the minutes from February 20, or the minutes from February 14th as a guide to what's still in process, but nothing new has happened except if you looked across the street, the playground is being installed. So most of the structure is up. Tomorrow they're going to be putting a lot of stuff in concrete and getting the surface ready for the new mulch. It's a way ahead. There were some missing parts. I didn't hear any update on that today, but it's exciting to have that done, have that in process and get that cleaned up over there.
Yeah, there was some concerns as well as we were leading up to this about the size of it. Would it be like we're replacing something that was big with something that's small? If you take a look at it, it looks big. I think residents will be very happy with what they're seeing. That pleases me greatly.
The chief thinks it's closer to us.
I guess because it's bigger.
If we see it moving closer to us, we know there's a flood coming. Just a reminder, the Human Rights Commission first meeting will be tomorrow night at 5 o'clock in this room. It will be a commission organization meeting and training. I did prepare copies of the agenda. It is a public meeting, and feel free if you wish to come. Of course, they will be setting their agenda. There will be an organization appointing the chair and the vice chair of the committee, adoption of Robert's rules, and then Mr. Donald is going to go into some training of the history of the ordinance and walking through some of the procedures that they might encounter at some point in time. So it's exciting to see this finally taking off, and we'll be here at 5 o'clock tomorrow night. Finally, actually not finally, the Board of Tax Review, we're still looking for appointees, so please let's get those filled. And then finally, the fire and EMS service transition, as the mayor mentioned, takes place seamlessly at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. I am very grateful for the time and effort that has been put into this project by Mr. Lanzer, Mr. Van Harn, everybody else who served on the transition team over the last several weeks. Mr. Donellan and all of his input leading us through this process for the last 2 years. I think this is a great conclusion and solution for us going forward. And there is an announcement of this taking place. It's in the blog on the website. I'll post it on social media this evening. And feel free to send any questions that you may get our direction so we can answer people's questions. We are still planning on doing a town hall. We just haven't come to a conclusion as to when that's going to be yet. One of the things that I would remind you, we mentioned in the Finance Committee meeting this evening that the tax levy is on the ballot for May 3rd. The issue number has not yet been assigned. That'll happen within the next week or so. The council will need to make a decision if anybody or if any of the leaders in the community wish to support passage of that levy. Again, early voting takes place starting on April 4th, so you're aware of that. That's all we need to care of. And that's all, unless there are questions, that's all I have to report this evening. Lots going on.
Mr. Hurth, thank you. Mr. Hurth and I had discussed that the fiscal officer report will probably change the name to fiscal officer and economic development report moving forward, but
Sure.
Wanted to turn that over to you. I know that there may be some announcements.
Yeah, I reviewed the January 2022 financial packet in the finance meeting. I'm happy to give that again. I'll also be discussing the overview of where we stand at the end of fiscal year 21, an update of Deer Park, and two items, I believe, that will have legislation for this evening. The first one, for January 2022, the village maintained an adjusted bank balance of $2.8 million. Of this, nearly $94,000 rests in several police-related law enforcement funds and can only be used for those purposes. In January, there were 27 outstanding payments that totaled $32,000. And there were 77 payments cleared the village bank accounts that totaled $195,000. Of this amount, 176 is accounted for in the village's general fund. General fund's appropriation spend is up compared to January last year, but one of the big differences, we are now paying for Adelita for the Vera project. I think that's probably why. As for revenues, the village generated $70,000 in January in general fund income tax receipts. Good news is this was nearly $35,000 more than what the village generated during January of last year. So good news. We have not received any property taxes yet, but we advanced legislation in December requesting early dispersal. I just need to follow up with Tammy. And speaking to LMFR, they have a similar problem. So I don't know what's going on in the auditor's office, but we'll get it figured out. So that's my financial report this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions about January if anyone has them.
Have we heard that the LMFR is finalized on the books and
Yeah,
that last
yes, that's one of the things I was going to talk about tonight. But yeah, so I worked closely with my counterpart at Deer Park Silverton Fire Department, as well as Jenny Kaminer from LMFR, to finalize the numbers on what we were to be receiving, as well as when we were going to be receiving it. So if you recall, village residents are paying a Little Miami fire tax this year. They will pay it throughout the year for this year only, because property taxes are paid a year in arrears. So the question has been, if they're collecting that, when and how much are they going to be giving to us in the frequency? And we are essentially a pass-through to the new fire service with Deer Park Silverton. So we agreed that the Village of Gulf Manor will pay Deer Park Silverton our contracted amount by the 5th of every month moving forward for the next 5 years. We've made that payment for March. We made that payment last week. It totaled, I think, approximately $48,000. So that payment's been made. The more complicated issue is, how is LMFR going to pay us? They made a request to the county auditor for early dispersal, and typically when you make that request, you get a lump sum payment. They haven't received that yet. They're still but they are receiving dribs and drabs. So what they are doing is they are going to pay us 22% or whatever the percentage is as soon as they get that in their bank account. And then they also owe us approximately $95,000 every year on March 1st for the next 5 years. As part of the asset allocation.
105.
Yeah, 105. I'm sorry.
Oh, is that what had been
It's
said?
105.
They were making they were taking steps to get that paid this week, because I
They-
think Jenny
we
was
are-
on vacation.
Yeah, she cut a check right before she left, so we should be getting it any time now. Unfortunately, those things go through snail mail, so we're in 2022. We're still relying on electronic payments, but that's neither here nor there. So that check has been cut. It's for approximately $129,000. So once that goes in there, or once we receive it, we will appropriate that to a dedicated line item in the general fund, and we will track revenues and payments, so we can keep track of that account flow correctly. But the first payment has been cut to us. It's approximately $129,000.
So it sounds like that number of 105 is at the high end of the estimate.
Yeah, I think they finished the year with a little bit more money than they thought they were going to have.
So we get 105 a year for the next 5 years, 3% increase on that in years 4 and 5. And then we will collect over the next 6 months our proportionate share of Medi-Account billings as they collect them from last year. So that may be another $30,000, $40,000
that could come to us between now and June 30, which will settle up everything with them.
Yeah, the good news is from our end, it's the Village of Gulf Manor, Deer Park Silverton, and LMFR are all on the same page.
Right.
So when the new service starts at 6 or 7 a.m. tomorrow morning,
6 a.m.
6 a.m., there will be no disruption from home due to financial issues. We got it. So. hope that
Thank you,
answers
Yes,
your
thank you,
question.
Mr. Flanders. Appreciate it.
Now, for an overview of last year, any other questions about that?
What was the revenue again of the, was it 71,000? It was 35,000? Which line item was that? I didn't quite catch that.
Are you talking about Deer Park?
No, it was the,
Yeah, so for January, we generated $70,000 in income tax receipts.
okay,
And that's $35,000 more than what we generated in January,
position tax, okay. I just couldn't catch it. Thank you.
which is good news. So we are forecasting receipt of $860,000. That's quite a bit less than what we actually received last year. We received $938,000 in income tax receipts last year. The reason being is the employees at the firehouse are no longer here. So I wanted to be as conservative as possible, but still realistic in how much we're going to get. But we're going to monitor that quite closely. And we're prepared to make any adjustments necessary.
Okay.
Yep. So where did we stand at the end of last year? So myself, Paula, and Carolyn, Paula's not here any longer, spent a lot of time closing the books for last year. We had to complete a bank reconciliation, 1099s, purchase orders. You wouldn't believe the amount of purchase orders a government municipality the size of Gulf Manor has, but there's a ton. And then we had to create and generate several regulatory statements and debt schedule statements that have to go to the auditor. So all of that was completed on February 14th, 2 weeks ahead of the deadline. The auditor's deadline's February 28th. They have all that finished. So beat the deadline. That's always a good sign. To end the year, the village had an adjusted bank balance of $2.9 million. As for the general fund, revenues for the year exceeded those from the previous year in the amount of $44,000, a total of $2.17 million. The largest sources of revenue for the village were obviously both income tax and real estate property taxes. In regards to general fund income tax receipts, as I mentioned before, the village generated $936,000 for the year. This amount was $115,000 more than what the village generated during fiscal year 20. Real estate property taxes were also up. The village generated $687,000 last year. That's nearly $30,000 more than what the village generated during fiscal year 20. So both those areas, in revenue, we appear very financially strong and healthy. Appropriations spend was also up though. The village spent 95% of all general fund appropriations last year. For reference, council approved $2.3 million in general fund appropriations, and the village spent $2.2 million. Both the total appropriations approved by council and the actual spend of those appropriations exceeded that from the previous year. And there's lots of reasons why that was. Fiscal year 20 was the pandemic year. We had to adjust per the recommendation of several state and county agencies in RETA. We wanted to lower revenue forecasts in 2020, which also meant we had to lower appropriations as well. So if you read through the packet, you'll notice that. Let's see here. Despite the increase in general fund revenue receipts for the year, when compared to that from fiscal year 20, village appropriation spend did exceed total revenues last year. As a result, the village general fund balance, or the carryover, ended fiscal year 21 nearly $60,000 below the figure from fiscal year 20, ending with a total of $920,000. Although a lower figure than the previous year, the village general fund balance remains healthy, current fund balance is 3 times larger than that from fiscal year 17. And if you recall, we anticipated the fund balance to be quite a bit lower than what it actually was. We were buoyed in large part by enormous gains in income tax receipts, which is a good thing. That's the end of my overview from last year. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have about that.
Thank you, Mr. Lancer. Any questions?
So if you wish to read any of this in detail, it's in your packet, but you can always go to the website under financial health, which is on that drop down. It'll take you to the 2021 financial data page. These are all the monthly packets. And then the 2021 report that Andy just referenced is posted here. So that is also a requirement that we post that in the newspaper, that we have copies here available for the public to review, and then it's on our website. That was all done by February 14th.
February 14th. Just as so everyone knows, when we have an audit, that's where the auditors start from. Those documents that form that PDF. So, 2 other items I have relate to some legislation this evening. The village administration would like to purchase a new vehicle for the service department. The vehicle would be a 2022 Ford F-250 and would replace the department's existing 2012 Ford F-250. It's just come to the end of its service life. We use that for salting roads. If you've been around vehicles driving on salted roads, it just destroys them. So if approved, we're going to move forward in purchasing a vehicle for them. The price on that vehicle is $54,000, and it will be purchased in coordination with the Ohio Purchasing Collaborative from Fuller Ford. Due to several factors, I don't know if anyone's tried purchasing a vehicle lately. There's low vehicle inventory, and the service department has some unique needs at what they need out of a vehicle, so that vehicle has to be built. The estimated build time for this vehicle is 3 to 6 months. With that said, the village has requested financing from U.S. Bank, Fifth Third, and Ford Credit, and we are recommending that council approve a financing arrangement with U.S. Bank. The terms of that arrangement are $54,000 at an interest rate of 3.48% for a term of 36 months, beginning upon delivery of the vehicle. Anyone have any questions about that?
What happens to the old truck? Gov deals?
Yeah, I believe we'll go to the county and put it on the county auction. Typically what we do for those things. And then, any questions about the vehicle? No. The last item is, and I looked over it, I missed it in the finance committee, but we do have an ordinance to amend appropriations this evening. The police department, and Chris, you can probably explain it better than I can, but my understanding is the police department received reimbursement from the state for training, mandatory training. So costs associated with police department maintaining certain certifications.
Yeah.
And that amount was approximately $4,200. So what we are requesting is to account for that as additional revenue, and then we would like to reappropriate that $4,200 to help the police department meet additional training needs. That's the end of my report.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Lancer. If there are no further questions for Mr. Lancer, I will ask Chief Campbell for his report.
I may just say thank you, Andy. Great, really comprehensive.
Appreciate it.
To the whole team.
Sorry.
This month beginning for January 2022, instead of just citing our calls for service numbers, I'm going to share a detail of that. Some of you may have questions on what some of these codes mean. Some of these codes existed before I got here. I inherited them. We're still working on combining some and simplifying some. But for the month of January 2022, the village responded to 377 calls for service. I was pleased to see the most common calls in here were things that are initiated by the officer. One of the ones you'll see is directed patrol. That's when officers take initiative to monitor certain areas for traffic violations, watch businesses as they close, make sure things are happening. So some of those areas that are initiated by the officers were directed patrol, parking complaints, traffic stops. Those are some of our higher numbers. I was pleased to see that. Does anybody have any questions on any of these? No? Okay. Also, I want to inform or share with this council some of the training that the PD received in the month of January 2022. So members of the department were trained in community diversity and procedural justice instructor. So we'll be able to train some of our officers and other officers from other departments. Domestic terrorism and hate groups, lessons learned from the civil unrest in Louisville Metro PD, use of force investigations and investigations of officer-involved shootings. I'll be able to share the trainings we receive each month. We'll have somebody trained on something every single month. So I'll keep you all aware of that as part of my report also. And that is all I had, unless you have any questions.
Very good. Thank you, Chief Campbell.
I do have a question.
Okay.
On the self-directed calls,
Mhm.
is that kind of like, just because you're part of the community, they kind of know when to be certain places to help? Or how does that work?
That's a no-no.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we don't want somebody to know I'm gonna be here at 7:15.
Okay,
Yeah, it's just officers kind of seeing how the shift is going, where they're seeing people. Maybe, you might see activity in a certain area, so you want to make a point to be in that area, make sure everything's okay. The stores and the businesses close at the same time, so UDF, we've always kind of stood by while the workers finish up and get out of there and make sure they're good. And then, if they're checking through business lots at night, watching, a lot of its intersections, traffic stuff, watching bus stops in the mornings and the evenings, that type of activity.
so it's a combination of kind of knowing where the areas might be, but also being unpredictable at the
Exactly,
same time. Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Chief, I know because the report was behind my back and because I didn't take the time to actually read it before this evening, I know that you guys have been practicing wellness checks for a very long time, that there's people that you check in on and everything. Is that a component of the report yet, where you're sharing with council, the community, that
So
this
we
is something
have
that you do?
Well-being checks is
Yeah.
a category in here. Some of these are sensitive, so I'm not gonna give too many details. But I do see that the officers logged for the month of January. I know from dealing with members of the PD, especially the day shift officers, there's certain people they know. And it might be a casual thing where they're not logging it, but they'll drive by, see somebody in the yard, talk to them for a couple of minutes and then go on. I've encouraged officers to record more of what they do for these. So I'll keep an eye on the numbers and see where that's at.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I don't think any of us is looking for, details, who and when and all that kind of stuff. Just, as I was sharing in part of my report, I know that certain events can trigger more of a need for checking on folks. And when we're kind of keeping track of that and that we're aware that we're doing that, makes me happy. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Any other questions for Chief?
One other side note, I talked to you about this a few months ago. My son has learned how to dial 911, and I've been very impressed with the response time. Sorry about the call. We'll get them trained.
I noticed our gas receipts.
Well, the cell phones, they can be locked, but still do it. And
Yeah.
he doesn't. And
He's just safety conscious.
yeah, we're working with them. But kudos, they showed up my door a couple times, so, thank you.
All right. Mr. Donilon.
To follow that up, we do have a frequent caller ordinance. We might just send you and your son a letter.
He's getting better.
I have two pieces of legislation tonight. Following up Mr. Lanzer's report, The first is ordinance 2022-1. And I have a motion to read this by title only.
Motion to read by title only.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And this is an ordinance to amend appropriations for current expenses and other expenditures of the Village of Gulf Manor for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2022. And we need a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second.
As Mr. Lanzer explained, this adjusts our budget numbers for the receipts from the state and the expenditures for additional trainings. So we need a roll call vote.
Mr. Batchor?
Yes.
Ms. Cheney?
Yes.
Mr. Kniff?
Yes.
Mr. Fisher?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Van Horn?
Yes.
And so this ordinance could take effect immediately. I need a motion to suspend the second and third readings.
Motion.
Second.
And we need a roll call vote.
Mr. Batchor?
Yes.
Ms. Cheney?
Yes.
Mr. Kniff?
Yes.
Mr. Fisher?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Van Horn?
Yes.
And we presented to you before the meeting the legislation for the lease purchase of the 2022 Ford F-250 pickup truck. But I do need a motion to make two amendments. The first is to amend the amount to $54,000 from $52,000. And combined with that motion is to amend the semi-annual payment to $9,558.98. So we need a motion to amend.
Motion to amend.
Second.
All those-
Before we vote on this, because it's being financed through US Bank, I need to recuse myself as an employee and shareholder of US Bank.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Venture has recused himself.
Thank you.
And do we need a roll call for that?
All in favor on that?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Without objection, I'll take that as unanimous minus the abstention of Ms. Venture.
And then may I have a motion to read this by title only?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And this is Resolution 2022-13, a resolution authorizing a lease purchase of a service department vehicle through Fuller Ford Inc. and U.S. Bank Corp. Government Leasing and Financing Inc. We need a motion and a second to approve it as amended.
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
And again, this is authorizing the lease purchase of a vehicle that will be constructed and delivered to the service department sometime around Thanksgiving.
Hopefully soon.
So we need a roll call vote on that.
Mr. Batchor?
Abstain.
Is there, hold on, is there,
Oh, sorry.
I was gonna ask him, I didn't know if your
I,
recusal was.
from all discussion,
Right.
yeah.
No offense.
No, it's all good, I appreciate it. Abstain?
Ms. Cheney?
Yes.
Mr. Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. Kniff?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Van Horn?
Yes.
And I know as we adjourned 2 weeks ago, we were going to go through my riveting presentation on Sunshine Law and public records. So I know you've been waiting for 2 weeks for this. So, and many of you have taken the training, so I'm not going to go into the detail that the trainer may have gone into, but kind of bring it home to all of you in terms of what we're required to do and how we do business. At the core of all of it is transparency. Transparency by having open meetings, transparency by having open public records that anyone can request at any time. And we have a duty, if we have that record and it's not privileged, we have a duty to produce it. Trying to clarify, I think, a little bit what the trainer explained to you, that the 12122, the Ohio Sunshine Law, the Public Meetings Act, says all meetings of any public body are open meeting. Any resolution or formal action taken is invalid unless adopted in an open meeting, and all deliberations must occur in an open meeting. So breaking that down, a meeting is a prearranged meeting of a majority of the persons of the public body, whether it's a committee, whether it's council, but a prearranged meeting. The example I always give, if there's 3 of you that are on the finance committee and 2 of you run into each other at Aldi's, we do not have to get on the public address system and announce that there's a public meeting in Frozen Peaks. It was not prearranged. You may say, oh, were you there the other night? Can you fill me in? Again, you're not discussing it, public business at that time. Deliberations, by definition, deliberations are a decisional analysis, a thorough discussion of all factors involved, weighing and examining reasons for or against a choice. And I'm going to give an example of a month ago, 2 months ago, when we discussed the levy. And we discussed it openly. You debated it for a good 30 minutes. And there was some discussion of, well, I talked to such and so, and I reviewed this with such and so. That's fine. That's fine. Because you announced in the meeting where you were coming to your conclusion. You know, where it gets in trouble, and I think the trainer was trying to speak to that, is when a majority get together ahead of time, they discuss it and they decide how they're going to vote, and then simply come into a public meeting and vote. They don't talk about it. And typically this is a problem in townships because there's only 3 members. So 2 get together and say, what do you want to do with this? I'm going to vote against it. I'm going to vote against it too. And then they come to the meeting and they don't discuss why that's a problem. Because it was prearranged, they got together, they discussed it, and in the meeting, they did not inform the public of their deliberations. If we had a very strict reading that 2 people could never get together and talk about it, I don't know how Columbus would operate. When one legislator goes down the hall and says, hey, would you co-sponsor this bill with me? You have to be able to discuss things. You have a duty to discuss things. But keep in mind, you have a duty when you get in here to discuss why you've come to your conclusion. There's a lot of case law, what they call the onesies and twosies, the serial meetings, where people tried to get around the sunshine law by the city manager meeting privately with 1 or 2 members, getting them on board, and meeting with 1 or 2 members, getting them on board, and then coming into a meeting, and then nobody discusses it, they just vote on it. This was quite common with the city of Cincinnati, and they got in trouble in a case with the old Post Time Star. That's how old it is. The onesies and twosies. Court said, you can't do that. You've got to meet, but you've got to discuss what you deliberated, how you came to your decision. There's actually a court case out of one of the counties up north where the township would get together ahead of time, discuss the entire legislative agenda, then they'd open the meeting, they'd sit there, and like a third base coach, they'd send signals to each other to vote. They would never discuss it, they would just vote. And the court said, wait a minute. You never discussed why you came to that decision. Talk about it. Again, deliberations are fine if you talk about it in here. If you go outside and form an opinion and form a cadre of how we're going to vote, that's a problem. But don't feel like your neighbors and you can't talk to each other. Your leaders don't feel like you can't talk to each other as long as you tell us how you came to that conclusion. And as long as you're not trying to avoid the sunshine law by purposely getting together and discussing it. And again, it's the business of the public. Mr. Hirth mentioned earlier about the levy law. The business of council with the levy law is done. You voted. You put it on the ballot. Now, being done, we cannot use public resources to advocate for it. We cannot come in here at a meeting and say, vote for it or vote against it. We cannot hold meetings here, vote for it or against it. But as residents, you certainly can do what you need to do and want to do relative to advocating for it, but not in here, not here. And we can't put a post out there on the website for or against it. We can't put a newsletter out for or against it. But what you do as private citizens is your choice. But what's happened here, we're done. You voted on it. You put it on the ballot. So the component of that is minutes. That's how you tell people what was discussed, what was deliberated. Do we need a detailed transcript? No. We don't have to say, Mr. Knepp said this, then Mr. Van Harn countered that, and Mr. Knepp said that, then Mr. Betcher came over and said that, and Ms. Cheney said that. We don't need to do that. It's not a court hearing. Minutes are basically somebody needs to be able to pick it up, look at it, and know what was done and how you got there. And I think we do a pretty darn good job of doing that at every committee through council, and then we publish them. So that's all minutes are supposed to be. And tapes, if we tape a meeting, broadcast a meeting, that's not the official record of the meeting. That's not. That's just facilitating getting information to the public. In many communities where they record the meeting, it's strictly for the purpose of the clerk of council being able to go back and listen to it and remember what was discussed, what was said, and what was decided. Those recordings are a public record until such time as the minutes are produced, then the recordings can be deleted.
Oh.
And many
Terry, could
communities
you
do that.
repeat that, please?
If you record it, it is a public record until such time it's replaced by the minutes. But if you continue to hold on to it, it's still a public record. But rules are, those records can be destroyed when they're no longer of administrative value. So when a clerk puts out a tape recorder and records the meeting, so the clerk can go back later and remember what the discussion was and who decided what, from the moment that meeting's done, that's a public record until that clerk's done his or her job and then erases it. And they're permitted to do that. They're permitted to destroy it at that point in time. So if we broadcast our meetings, that is not our minutes. That is just facilitating it and a nice gesture for the residents to be able to see what's going on. But historically retaining that, we do not have to. If we do, it is a public record as long as we keep it. And someone could say, I'd like to see the video from the meeting of December such and so 2021. And if we have it, we have to give it to them.
And in theory, the RC2 that we adopt should address what we do with that type of video at the time that we make the decision to
Exactly.
dispose of it.
And that's public records. Whenever you have a record, any medium, which documents the business of the public entity, it is a public record. It is a public record. And it must be retained consistent with that retention schedule that we have. So keep in mind, it's any medium. So typically, if you send something through your Gulf Manor email, that is a public record. And anybody can say, I want to see it. And we retain it for a period of time. We have a right to delete it when it's no longer administrative value. We have a right. If we don't delete it, as long as we have it, it's still a public record subject to disclosure. This gets into the new world today of social media and texts. And when you use your personal phone to text, and you text about the business of Village of Gulf Manor, you create a public record. You got to be sure if you're destroying it, that you're destroying it consistent with our retention destruction schedule. And that typically is when it's no longer of administrative value. So what I always recommend is if you're going to use your phone to text and it's business of the village, copy it to your account here. We have it. We have it. It's documented here. And that way, if you've got a plan that automatically erases your text after 30 days, you're not in violation of the law because we've retained it here. If we then delete it consistent with our record, you're off the hook. You're off the hook. But it's not the medium you use, it's the message. That sounds like a book from the 70s.
What if you receive a text containing the village, but you do not respond to it? Is it just the responsibility of the sender then to save?
Yes. Yes. And that way, if you use your village email, we have it in the system. And then we have that responsibility to retain it. We have that right to destroy it. You don't have to worry about it on your personal computer. You don't have to worry about it on your text. But if you don't, then you are holding that public record until such time as it's destroyed. And for most of your communications, that standard is when no longer of any administrative value. The easiest example to give you, hey, can I meet you for coffee Friday morning at 8? Sure. Well, you're done. We don't have to keep that for 3 years to know that you met on Thursday morning at 8 for coffee. But we don't even have to wait until you meet. We don't have to wait till 8:01 to delete it. It's no longer value when you respond and say, sure. But there are exceptions. There's a whole page after page of exceptions to public records. So when a request comes in, it's important that you refer it to Andy or Ron so that we can respond to it. And if it's privileged or information that should be redacted, we can then do that. I'm always an advocate of the broad production of those documents. Broad production. There's nothing we want to hide. There's nothing we should ever hide. So if somebody's submitting a public records request, unless it is very privileged, we're gonna give it to them. And the biggest problem we have with public records are people are not saying, I want to see the police report from January 15th at 12:01 a.m. on Vera. They're not asking for that. They're saying, how many times did you guys go to Vera in January 2021? It's not a public record. It's an inquiry. We don't have to create a record for that. So that's where typically I'm responding and saying, you're not requesting a public record. There's times though too, again, in transparency, someone makes a request like that. I know what the answer is. I'm not going to play a game with them. I'm going to say, you're not requesting a public record, but I believe you're looking for the incident report to the Smith household that night. Here it is. Here it is. But things that we typically redact, anything that's medical. Now, we're not operating a fire department or EMS squad anymore, but those run reports that had diagnostic information in there, we would redact that. That's private health information. It's protected. We would not give that out. People say, well, I want to know where Chris Campbell lives. I want his address. We're not giving that out. We're not giving it out. Somebody wants to know, a lawsuit and then how we're handling it. We'll give you the lawsuit, but our internal communications on handling it are privileged communications. We will not give it out. So again, those are narrow categories. But anything that documents the business of the Village of Gulf Manor is a public record. And your caution or concern should be, if I don't have it in the system here, can I delete it? If you do have a question or concern, call us. We'll walk you through it. But the best thing is, try not to use your personal devices, because your personal devices then become a repository for public records.
So, and that would be why we've issued email from the village to everybody. If I text you, it would not be about village business. It would just be reminding you when a meeting is. So when, occasionally you've received texts to the whole group that says, hey, don't forget we have this meeting, those kinds of things, it's best that you just use that village email for that type of communication. That's beyond when are we going to meet.
The instance in which you're getting, it's debatable whether it's spam or whether it's really a contractor that's interested in doing business with the village and you're just deleting it. I'm presuming that because it's not going to your personal email, it's going to your government email. Presuming Brett has set it up that regardless of what you're deleting, it's there someplace, right? Like we can delete spam from our account without worrying about it. Is that right?
One other question.
Correct.
Yeah.
Even if you delete it, it gets retained.
Right. That's what I'm
And
saying.
that's been a huge public debate issue, that when you push delete, you're really not deleting. And there was a case in Northern Ohio where they balked at producing these records for year after year after year after year. The entity came in and said, we deleted them. The judge said, but delete doesn't really delete, and forced them to go back and hire a forensic computer person to retrieve every bit of the records. People play games with public records. There was a no longer licensed attorney in Northern Ohio who decided that the way to make a living was knowing you did not have a record and make a public records request of you, and then requesting $1,000 a day for all the days you did not have that record.
He got $4 million. That was taught to us in that class.
It was the Bucyrus case because he knew, old school, police department had reel-to-reel tapes. All phone calls came in on reel-to-reel tapes. And he knew that the police department rotated them. I think, like they always had a Monday tape, Tuesday tape. So the next Monday, they take the old Monday tape and put a new Monday tape on. So they're recording over it and deleting it. And he sued them and said, I want all these records back to 1972. The police department said, well, we don't have those. Judge said, did you have a record destruction schedule that permitted you to tape over those tapes day in and day out? No. They said, well, then you owe this gentleman $1,000 a day for every day. And he said, well, I'll only take $4 million. I'll compromise. Because of him, that law's been changed, that the maximum you can get is $10,000 at 10 days. But we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we're destroying records and subjecting ourselves to $10,000 checks on a repeating basis.
I have a question that was, what if I take notes in a meeting?
Good question. Personal notes are not public records unless you share those personal notes with another member of the public body, because then you are publishing them.
So if I write something down and go, hey, Danny, check this out.
So if Danny says, hey, I didn't make the meeting, can I see your notes? You've now created a public record. If you have your notes or your personal notes are not subject to
Okay.
a public records request.
And that includes the process that we use for the minutes.
Right.
So
Last
just
thing,
showing
touch
me
on
a
it.
sketch of this, doodlings does not make that part of the record.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, if I ask for it because it contains information that was in the meeting, that's different.
And what we have to do when we get a public records request, per our policies, we have to acknowledge receipt of the request, and we have to respond within a reasonable period of time. And then if we cannot respond within a reasonable period of time, we have to respond to tell them why we can't respond within a reasonable period of time. And then we cannot charge them copy costs unless we can prove the actual cost of the copy. That's why most records, if somebody comes to the PD and says, can I get a copy of the traffic accident report from last Wednesday on Weed, we go here. And the only time typically we charge for copy costs is if we have a large external production cost associated with it. And we have to give it to them in a medium in which it's available. So right now, typically someone says, load it on a thumb drive or a memory stick, we give it to them. But always, 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 if you get a public records request, forward it over here so we can make sure that we document it, because we are still required to document requests. And then we can vet it to make sure we're giving them the information they want. Lastly is executive sessions. The exception to the Public Meetings Act is executive sessions. But when you go to an executive session, you can only go to an executive session for one of the purposes that's outlined within the statute. And then you have to make that motion, state that motion on the record, then we need a roll call vote. Now, anything that happens in executive sessions are absolutely confidential. You're not permitted to go out and discuss them. You're not permitted to suggest to anybody what we talked about. In minutes, we do not keep minutes of executive sessions. They're very limited, and they're limited for the purpose of this is something that public disclosure would cause a problem. Purchase and sale of real estate. If we all got into an executive session and said, well, let's offer $150,000 for that property, but in a public meeting, we said, let's offer $150,000, but we're willing to go to $175,000. You know, in your business, what's the guy going to do? Well, I want $175,000. So that's one of the exceptions. The Hicks case that I think the trainer talked about out of Claremont County is on its way to the Supreme Court, because one of the exceptions for executive sessions is discussion of the promotion, compensation, demotion, discipline, or hiring of a public official or public employee. And all communities will typically say, we're going into executive session for matters of personnel concerning compensation of a public employee. And many communities will actually read the whole thing, the promotion, blah, 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 of a public employee. So in the Hicks case, they objected and said, well, how can you have an executive session for the promotion and demotion of a public employee? You're either going to fire him or you're going to promote him. You can't get both. So that's going to the Supreme Court to decide, can you just read that and it covers it, or do you have to be more and more specific? I'm going to go in and fire this guy. There's some communities that have been burned enough by it that when someone makes a motion into executive session, they read the entire 121-22 list of exceptions. And I look at that and go, no. You can't say, well, we might talk about real estate. Well, we might talk about promoting a public employee. We might talk about economic development. You know what? We might talk about security measures relative to the community, whether or not we can disclose those. So they want to know when you're going to make the exception. They don't need to know the specifics of it, but this is something that's evolving with public records. There was an attempt a few years ago because one of the exceptions was imminent or pending litigation. And one of the legislators said, okay, We understand why you wouldn't want to discuss imminent litigation. But we think within 6 months, you have to announce what that litigation was. It's like, well, what's the purpose of imminent or pending litigation if I got to tell the public what it's about? But a lot of times, imminent or pending litigation has to do with lawsuit. As an example, if someone were to file a 1983 action against one of our police officers, they can go find a public record, but we need to discuss it. We need to discuss that in executive session to assure you what happened, and 999 times out of 1,000 to explain to you our officer did nothing wrong. And we have insurance in place and we will vigorously defend them. But we got to narrow it. I always try to make sure you're on that path. If you make a motion for executive session, always try to say, did you mean for this? So we can get the language into the record. Questions?
Nice refresher.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Donovan. Any other questions? Thank you, sir. Is that
So three of them we're talking about a particular village business subject needs to be an open meeting. Three of them.
Yes. If you get a majority, but keep in mind, if the committee is of 3 of you, that committee now, the majority is 2.
So to talk privately, it can still only be one-on-one.
Okay, you can talk privately, but talk publicly about the decision when it's made.
Okay.
Let people know what the deliberation.
So basically, you come in and you say, I talked to this other member of the community, of the committee over the weekend. This is what we discussed. This is the conclusion that I came to.
Right.
Then you're covered.
An example, Board of Zoning Appeals Planning Commission. You get a request for a variance. And typically you'll go out there the weekend before the hearing to take a look at it. See what the lay of the land is, see what this fence is. If you're out there and another member of the commission's there, you're naturally going to say, I don't know, that fence doesn't look right. I agree with you, it doesn't look right.
So if Matt and Sharon are already out there and I wander by, that's okay.
Yeah.
And we
But
can talk
again,
about the issue at hand.
If you then come into that
Come
meeting,
back to council, then it's like, or the committee, really.
if you come into the meeting then and say, I visited this property on Bureau over the weekend. I looked at the fence. I thought the fence was too high. I'm not going to approve the variance. I think that they need to remove the fence. You could have talked about all that at the site, but you're telling people right now in real time why you're going to vote against
That makes
it.
sense.
The problem is if 3 of you meet out there and go, we're not going to approve this, I already know. And then you come to the meeting and you don't explain to them, you just vote against it.
I think we were all worried about numbers and we're at the July 4th party and we talk about something. 4 of us are standing at the hot dog stand talking about stuff and we get in trouble. So.
Well, the book that Mr. Hirth gave everybody, Now What? Great book. And there's a little section on communicate with your fellow legislators. The key is communication. You're not a silo. You got to work together to get results. That doesn't mean you can go off and have secret meetings and have 5-minute council meetings. It just means you talk to each other, but you come in here and you talk to each other. And in effect, you talk to the public through that microphone and those cameras to let them know why you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you, sir.
Did we want a 5-minute executive session tonight on matters of the purchase and sale of real estate?
I think we had agreed that we do need to do that.
So I will make that request when we're ready to adjourn.
Okay.
And just the last note, thanks for your warm thoughts and prayers. It was a tough week last week, losing my brother. Thank you. I always hoped I could get through that.
I'm aware that the executive committee did not meet this evening. Their next meeting will be on Monday, March 7th at 6 p.m. Mr. Van Horn, do you have any other announcements concerning the executive committee?
Yeah, I had 2 or 3 people respond
I'm sorry.
to the idea of working on little subcommittees for certain, some of the projects or ordinances and things. So I haven't figured that out yet, but hopefully by the end of the week, I'll have those things settled and I'll be able to say them.
Very good. And I misspoke. I said the 7th, it's March 14th at 6 p.m. And I mentioned in the report about the last day of service being today through 6 a.m. tomorrow. Mr. Van Horn or Mr. Lanzer, any other comments about the Fire District Board report?
No other comment. I just want to reiterate some that I think was mentioned earlier. Roger and I, we want to tell all the firefighters who've worked in Station 47 through the years that their work has been much appreciated. And I'm excited about the opportunity to hopefully everyone get back together and share fond memories of an active station. And I know that station was a pillar of the community for a long time. So thank you to the current firefighters and the past firefighters over there.
So say we all.
And at our last meeting, there was a lot of appreciation for Andy's help with a lot of things, but specifically the union contract that went through. And fortunately, it was finalized before our last board meeting, which was, 2 weeks ago. And so I wanted to commend Andy, because I know we can't be apprised of a lot of stuff, but certainly not everything. And he really was a big part of doing that, and I appreciate his commitment to doing it with dignity, even with everything that's going on. And I heard from a few people that from outside Gulf Manor, that do realize that our station closing is a painful, or it's a big deal or whatever, and they plan on extending that and trying to attend and do what they can. And so there is some awareness about what it's like for us to do this out there beyond Gulf Manor. So that was given to me also at the meeting and through other avenues. So.
Well, and to both of you, the meetings that I attended during those days when there was a lot of contention going on, you both handled yourself very well at those meetings and did Gulf Manor proud with your service. So thank you. The Planning Commission, the next meeting is Monday, March 14th or 7th?
That is correct.
That is the 7th, okay. The hearings for a variance request is scheduled. Is there any other comments, Mr. Betcher, on?
Not at this time.
Right. I mentioned that the first Community Engagement Committee meeting will be March 22nd at 9:30 a.m. Sharon, I'll ask you if there's any other comments you want to make about it, and then I'll ask about if there's a education liaison report. Any other comments about community engagement?
Not yet, I don't think.
Okay. Is there an education report?
Well, it's gonna be a different one tonight. When Mr. Von Harn mentioned that Len Mitzman had mentioned to him that Gulf Manor was incorporated because of a slaughterhouse, and then you posted it out online on Go Gulf Manor, I thought, well, 25 years ago when the committee I was on for history, for the 50th anniversary, I don't recall ever hearing that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to see what I can dig up. Well, I found it. And it's on the Cincinnati Library site. I am so impressed with what they have gotten done. If you ever want to look for history, they have the newspapers digitized, at least up to 2007. So I went in and I started looking at those newspapers. I figured it had to be in there. So I looked from 1945 to 1947, and I have it. It's this stack. There was something posted almost every day in the Cincinnati Post and Time-Star about this issue. Gulf Manor was Columbia Township. Gulf Manor was a subdivision of it. I haven't found out any information on how it got its name, other than the rumors that it came from golf courses. So I did go all the way back to 1929, and I have found a recorder's office now. There's plats out there that they have scanned. And I don't know the date on this one, but I know Gulf Manor's platted in 1929. So the name was there in 1929. So that was my next step, was to go to find out when Lasanaville Country Club was started, and that's 1906. Avon Fields, nobody knows when it started, but it's ancient. McIntyre is the early 1900s. Crest Hills was 1967, so that is eliminated as far as I'm concerned. So I'm thinking, okay, Lasanaville, it's probably named after that. And I also found something else that said here that in the early days, there was nothing here but farms and golf. So another reason why it could be named that. But okay, let's go. I made a timeline here and I'm going to make it as fast as I can. And I'm willing to make everybody copies of this if they want it, and my timeline so you can see it. But the first newspaper was March 4th, 1946. Gulf Manor, Amberley, and Ridgewood began investigation of the John Hilberg and Sons Company, which is meat packing company, because they wanted to build in our neighborhood on 5.5 acres on Weehee, north of Langdon Farm, it says, which was an unincorporated area of Hamilton County. So they had a meeting that night with the owner and his son. And the Gulf Manor Civic Club held a meeting in the Gulf Manor Community Hall with 175 residents. It was a unanimous decision to protest John Hilberg and Sons slaughterhouse to be built in Gulf Manor's residential area. And then this is the March 6th newspaper. The residents wanted annexation to get Cincinnati's water supply because there wasn't enough water here. Robert Wackendorf was the builder here in Gulf Manor, and he had purchased more land. He had a row of empty lots on Lasanaville where homes could not be built because there wasn't enough water supply. Okay. So there were also no streetlights here in Gulf Manor then. So the petition was circulated by 25 women going door to door to get signatures. They got 300 signatures. John Hilberg and Sons purchased the land anyway for his plant on Weehee. The Hamilton County commissioners told the residents there is no zoning law in Hamilton County to keep the slaughterhouse out of a residential area. The Regional Planning Commission told the Cincinnati Post, that bills to get the county zoning were brought to state legislature regularly since 1929, but all had been defeated. Then the next day, the Gulf Manor residents were seeking annexation, discussed getting a court order preventing the meat packing plant. The property owners signed petitions hoping to get 400 to 500 signatures for an injunction, which you'll be familiar with. If the community is annexed, the plant could be built anyway under the nonconformity statute, which allows completion of a building already under construction. Construction would have to start before the city rezoned the new territory. Then the next day, residents began to believe they were being tricked into believing about annexation. So they called a mass meeting, and there were 700 homeowners to hear the sides with no trickery promised. Some thought the injunction petition was being signed and not annexation. Robert Wackendorf was filing the injunction against the slaughterhouse. He was the builder. He was developing 50 acres here. So annexation papers were signed by 100 residents. Others against it were due to doubling their taxes, because if they annex, they want it to be annexed to Cincinnati. But if they annex, the residents would receive free garbage pickup, lower electric rates, street repairs, and sidewalks. The Common Pleas Court was asked to permanently restrain the slaughterhouse via an injunction. Okay, March 13th, 2 residents met with the county commissioners on incorporation. They were told if Gulf Manor annexed, it was no guarantee that Cincinnati would rezone the industrial zone to residential to keep the packing house out. Next day in the paper, residents met to discuss the next move. 6 other communities joined: Roselawn, Norwood, Pleasant Ridge, Amberley, and Kennedy Heights. Most residents now doubted the chances to keep the packing house out. March 15, the next day, 450 residents met to get it off their chest. It was a get it off your chest meeting, all strongly against the packing company. They couldn't agree whether to annex or incorporate. Next day in the paper, sewer line was being laid for the slaughterhouse was sabotaged. The community now leaning towards incorporation. 100 residents met to draw plans to incorporate. Incorporation must have zoning laws to prevent plans such as this. 333 residents signed the petition to incorporate. A move to incorporate in 1944 had already failed. So March 27th, it's almost 2 weeks later, petitions with the 433 signatures for annexation were filed with the county commissioners. Residents learned that an incorporation petition may be presented to Columbia Township. Next day, Columbia Township accepts the petition for incorporation. Residents had to go to the polls to vote within 15 days. April 9th, which is almost another 2 weeks, election time came for the incorporation. If passed, the residents bounded by Lisanaville and Bremont and Hamel will petition for annexation. 750 residents cast their ballots. The incorporation passed 451 to 242. I'm almost done. It takes 45 days for Gulf Manor to become officially incorporated. Annexations then began for Lisanaville, Bremont, and Hamel. There was a bunch of argument going on. April 12th, annexation versus incorporation heads to the Common Pleas Court by opponents of the incorporation. The statute does not permit the area to be split. So I guess you can't do an incorporation and an annexation in the same area. That's what I'm thinking. So then nothing appeared in the paper till July 3rd. The court allowed the packing plant in Gulf Manor. Judge Hoffman states he is satisfied that the packing plant will not be a nuisance. And then all the way to September 11th, builder Robert Wackendorf filed a suit opposing incorporation of Gulf Manor as a village. John Hilberg and Sons joined the suit, which was the packing company. Injunction blocks the incorporation. Judge Mack states incorporation action should have been brought to the county commissioners, not the township trustees. And then next month, October, only 2 residents who own property could vote for the annexation, and they voted yes. And I found this really interesting. The smallest vote ever to be cast for an annexation. It was Mr. and Mrs. Henry Cordes, and they lived at 2150 Lisanaville in a large white frame house. I looked that up. That's the strip mall. So that house probably had to have been torn down. But she voted for it in order to get garbage collection, police and fire protection, and mail delivery. Then we go all the way to January. Hamilton County Court of Appeals approved the incorporation of Gulf Manor to be a village. The court reversed Judge Mack's ruling that they should have filed with county commissioners and not township trustees. So the annexation was postponed. Next month, Gulf Manor petitions to hold the first election. Special election would be held May 27th, 1947. May 27th, 1947, Thomas Dunlap was elected Gulf Manor's first mayor. He defeated 2 other candidates. Dorothy Stubbs elected clerk with 390 votes to 242. John Robinson was elected the treasurer over Joseph Braun. 6 council members were elected: Daniel Copen, Gilbert Siegel, Wallace Crawford, Gerald Bushman, William Estelle, and Jack Walbrook. June 4th, Robert LaRoe, I don't know, and Paul Weber. Union Central Building lawyers.
Weber and LaRue.
You know them?
Yeah.
All right.
They're
They
long
were
gone, but yeah,
They were chosen solicitors. They
Right.
were our first solicitors.
Weber and LaRue.
They petitioned the probate court for funds to begin the village operations. So I guess you can ask for money to start your corporation. I was surprised. And then they had passed a few emergency ordinances passed that night. So there's nothing else after that. So Ashley and I are going to go into the basement tomorrow morning, and we're going to look for that 1947 book, docs of ordinances, so we can get more information.
If you look at our zoning code, language might still be in there, which never made sense until now.
Okay.
That said you cannot drive your cattle, sheep, or pigs up the streets of Gulf Manor. Remember that when we were looking at the chickens?
Uh-huh.
Because we're like, well,
It's true.
this is our zoning code, you cannot drive livestock up the street.
Okay.
That's
So
stopped over.
that's interesting
They couldn't
because
unload from the train tracks then.
there were cattle here. It was dairy farms. The Borger Dairy is mentioned in some of these which was Vera Avenue, in some of these clippings. And Mr. Hurth got an email from a descendant of the Stover family. He sent it to me and said, can you help him? He was looking for information in the old newsletters. I knew that you were given him by Lynn Mitzman, so I sent it to you. And then you sent it to him immediately. He called me, so I talked to him today. Very interesting. He wasn't born here. His grandmother is a Stover. And apparently the Stover house was at the corner of Bremont and Elbrook. And gone now. But he said that he actually was born in Latonia, Kentucky. And the family moved from there to Kennedy Heights. But he went to Woodward and Schroeder, and he was friends with a lot of the Gulf Manor people around here. So he, I forgot where I was going with that. Oh, yeah. So, he met his wife on St. Albans. So that's the relationship for Gulf Manor for him, other than his grandmother. So what's interesting is, you might find this interesting. His name is Craig Rockenstein. He went to Chase Law School, and his first job was with Silease. He's a prosecuting attorney.
With the old size.
The old Silease, yeah, unbelievable. He's a year older than I am. He was born in 1947. He moved from Cincinnati down to Florida. He couldn't take the weather here, and now he's living in Georgia. But I thought, and his mother's second cousin was Carl Linder's first wife. That is interesting. His family, his mother grew up in Norwood. It's just, and when he comes to Cincinnati to see his aunt, he said he'll look me up. So it'll be interesting to talk to him. But those newsletters, I'm willing to volunteer to scan it. Do we have a scanner here?
Well, one of the issues is this, they're about this big.
I know, they were on legal size paper.
So
No?
let's see what they look like and
Okay.
see what we can do to get
Okay.
them done.
Because Charlotte Pieper wrote the Heritage articles, and I'd forgotten about that till you sent it to him. And he sent me the other two copies, or maybe Craig did. And I forgot that Charlotte Pieper, who family bought the Weehee house in 1906, I think our history says. So they lived here a long time. And I did get to talk to Mary Pieper, but I never met Charlotte because she had passed away. But Charlotte was a writer, and she had written a book too. Yeah, so we need to get those scanned.
Yeah, I walked
There's a
right
lot of
over-
history in
I walked
those.
right over to the box, filtered through it, they were in order, found that one.
Yeah.
Took pictures.
Really great work, Ms.
That's
Cheney, and I'm thinking with the 75th, anniversary, obviously, if we can put that together into a nice PDF and we're able to get all those into, a digital
Yeah,
format,
Great.
it'd be really great to get all that
Uh-huh.
online and keep it online for folks, moving
Right.
Can you
forward.
send me measurements?
So Craig did say one thing that I wanted all of you to know. He said he's shocked. He said he just sent that email, and to have a government turnaround information as fast as we did for him, he is in shock. And he said, this is a wonderful government here.
Right, I emailed you
Very
that.
great.
I plan on calling you tomorrow, but it was weird because I just got. those.
Oh.
So,
Uh-huh. Okay.
There's one education item that I wanted to mention about the CPS superintendent being selected.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
I just heard about it this evening
Oh.
as well. Is it Ironita Wright? I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, was selected. I think I mentioned before that they have a selection committee that got together. got input from all the different communities, elected officials included.
They
And,
had a lot of interviews.
They made their decision, and I'm looking forward to seeing their report about the decision that they made. I just know the name, so. I'm
So
looking
wait,
forward to that.
I do have one question of you. So the vote took place on May 27, 1947. So our official incorporation would be 45 days from then?
Probably because that's when they would have certified the election.
Okay,
When I Googled it,
there you go.
it said February 3, 2000, whatever, was our official incorporation date.
But it's not.
It's not?
No,
It's
because
Well,
the election wasn't held on May 27,
but you said it was a
1947.
lot of litigation after that. So it could have
You
been.
might have an extra year.
Yeah, it could have been that that was the day of the final decree from the court, because they say there was an objection of whether they should take in their petition to the county commissioners versus
Mhm.
Columbia Township. So
Yeah.
probably, you might be able to get into the Hamilton County Clerk of Court's website and see if there's that case
Okay,
and date of the final entry.
okay,
Or go down there, because that might be something they have not digitized yet.
okay.
After Mr. Betcher's Finance Committee report, I'm going to ask for a short recess before we go into executive session, for anyone that needs to use the bathroom like I do. Mr. Betcher.
Finance committee met, and I'll give a brief, we talked about financial audit committee as well. So that was very brief, nothing really to report from that. Finance committee met, Mr. Lancer covered the majority of things. The one thing is I've asked as chair of finance for the administration to start maybe putting together a strategy to park excess cash with the STAR fund with the state of Ohio, instead of it being in a checking account. So I look forward to report at next finance to create a strategy around that. That is all I have.
Great. Any questions? Next Finance Committee meeting is March 28th,
Yeah.
6 p.m.
Okay.
All right, with that, I'll ask for a motion for a short recess.
What do you want to go, make a motion first to adjourn to executive session from this regular session for the matters of purchase or sale of real estate, and then a short recess?
So moved.
Yes, if it can be included. I want to make sure the restroom is included.
All in favor?
Oh, you gotta
Gotta
go
do
roll call.
All in favor of roll call?
Mr. Badger?
Yes.
Ms. Cheney?
Yes.
Mr. Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. Kniff?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Van Hart?
Ending our live stream.
Okay, so we're ending our live stream, everyone. Thank you for your service.
See you.
And we will go into executive session here shortly after recess.